Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. He has the audacity to claim he fights hard when he's up against a candidate as confused as Melissa Lee, international adventurer and the Labour Party's answer to Fozzie Bear, the MP from Mount Albert, the affably intelligent David Shearer.
Hey, Bomber. Nice to see you
here. And he takes the orc out of Auckland. Who writes this stuff? Western Bay's advocate, man about town and reformed lounge lizard. Mothers, lock up your daughters. It's the dashingly charming Mr. Jeff Houtman.
Thank you, Bomber.
Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, John Key's welfare reform. Will it create jobs or is it just Benny bashing populism? Issue 2 is the privatisation of welfare like the privatisation of prisons in that we don't care, so let them rot. Issue 3, snow that isn't snow, earthquakes that don't shake, grotty sheep runs down Queen Street. Now Auckland lost against Tasman. Has the little big city lost its mojo? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. So John Key's big plan is to introduce welfare reforms, forcing the poor onto food stamp poverty ID cards so 16 and 17-year-olds can't buy ciggies or booze. This, of course, is a farce because 16 and 17-year-olds can't buy ciggies or booze at the moment. All stick and no carrot makes little Woodamoo prison statistic. How will this policy create jobs? David, making young people too weak from hunger to riot isn't much of a social policy, is it?
It's not much of a social policy, and it wasn't much of a conference either where he announced it, because, I mean, basically everybody was waiting over the weekend for the sizzle that was going to come out, and at the end, the sizzle was about 1,600, and actually when you look at the numbers, it's probably about 1,000, 16 to 18-year-olds who are getting this benefit, who are going to have a plastic card now in order to buy food. Is that it? I mean, we were waiting for the plan on the economy. How are we going to move forward? Some sort of understanding of what National stands for and where it's going to go after the election if it ends up winning it, and that's what everybody else was looking for. But in the end, we get 1,000 young people, 16 to 18-year-olds, who are going to be penalised, many of whom are actually already moving into either work or some sort of training. So it was in many ways, it was disastrous for National, because what it ended up doing was just painting the topic of the week, which is about how do we get 58,000 16 to 24-year-olds into work, or more importantly, how do we encourage them to go into education? So, and that is what the topic of conversation, and certainly the topic in the House has been this week. And we saw the most remarkable incident yesterday in the House, where Key is actually refusing to answer questions on this, and in fact left the House and gave the question that he was supposed to answer to Paula Bennett and said, answer this, and ducked out the side door, and Paula Bennett had to stand up and answer the questions on youth unemployment.
And Jeff, bashing dirty, filthy bennies is a nationwide hobby alongside rugby, domestic violence and cirrhosis of the liver. Why do you think New Zealanders are attracted to such counterproductive, punitive welfare policy?
I mean, everyone likes to have a go at the weak, don't they? I mean, they're an easy target. They can't usually fight back. But I mean, this new such and such card. What are they calling it? It's got a name or something. A little
smart, but it's not so smart card. But I mean,
something card. One of my flatmates told me that she's had that card for over a year.
Right.
And every time you go to social welfare for you've run out of food or whatever, they give you one of these cards. So is it that new?
No. They're just expanding it, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, and the no booze and cigarettes thing's quite interesting, because the supermarkets did that first with we can't add that to your shopping total to get your flyby points.
Yeah. Do you think there's some sort of there's a moral element in all of this, isn't there? We kind of look at people who might be spending, food or what have you on certain things that we don't think are good for them, and there's a bit of a smack on the hand. Isn't that quite nanny state for a government that was quite anti-nanny state?
Yes, it is. I mean, we, in my opinion, we voted Helen out because we were sick of the nanny state, and I don't think anyone's going to be happy if we get a slightly different coloured nanny state now, where we're going, what else is there apart
from
nannies?
It's the daddy state, isn't it? Isn't this the angry daddy state?
The daddy knows best state.
Yeah, the stepfather from hell.
I don't think people want a daddy knows best state. I think we're a little bit sick of it now.
David, during Labour's 9-year reign of glory, Helen wouldn't increase benefits after the Ruth Richardson mother of all budgets, as she was, I think the critics claimed, managing Redneck New Zealand rather than challenging it. Is Labour more focused now on evidence-based policy rather than that talk-back radio rhetoric when it comes to lifting the 210,000 New Zealand children who are living in poverty?
Yeah, I think we're much more focused now on what is actually happening, particularly in that. And look, I just wanted to just finish on on your opening part there on the evidence about what's going to lift the young people out of where they are at the moment, because it is pretty terrible when you've got 700% increase in youth unemployment.
That's right.
And I think there's a real issue around the movement from school into tertiary education. And just about all of the experts will tell you, and just coming back to your question about evidence, just about all of the experts will tell you that if somebody comes through school and falls out of school and goes on to an unemployment benefit or goes into a job and the job ends or something, it's incredibly difficult to lift those people up and put them back into some sort of education. It's almost impossible. So we are not very good in New Zealand of managing the transition from school into some sort of training. And really, to be honest with you, in a country that it needs to be high skilled, high labour productivity, we can't really afford to have our kids leaving school at 16 and getting inevitably a low paid job. They really do need to transition through to something more. And that, I think, is the real area.
Well, National would claim that's a minimum. That's a new youth wage, isn't it? They would suggest that cutting wages for young people is the way to get more of them employed. That's their solution to that problem.
Well, I mean,
exploiting young people who are unemployed. That's what they're doing.
I have two problems with that. I mean, I don't think the evidence shows that unemployment went up as a result of youth rates. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, look, if I'm working alongside a young person and I'm doing the same job as them, why should that person be getting a whole lot less pay? I mean, and the argument's been made. We've got high Maori and Pacifica unemployment. So are we going to give them a lower wage because that will encourage people to... It just doesn't make sense. I think there's a whole bunch of moral issues there that I feel very, very uncomfortable about.
Jeff, the military boot camps the government are running don't work. Apparently they just make fitter criminals. Who would have thunk it? Yeah. But Conservatives love that stuff. They love that stuff. So does it matter if this punitive welfare crap doesn't actually work either? I mean, blame the victim social policy is there to make those doing the blaming feel better, and a large chunk of New Zealand loves that. National are implementing what their angry constituents want, aren't they? So where's the problem?
Well, the problem is, as you said, it doesn't work. Which
it's a minor inconvenience, really, isn't it?
Not a fresh problem. Rudman had a very interesting piece in the Herald yesterday about exporting our jobs overseas. The whole Sea Lord deal, the whole using Asian and Ukrainian sailors and the terrible conditions and that sort of stuff. Now, I keep thinking, why can't we have a little bit less profit in Sea Lord and a hell of a lot less employment, upskilling, training? I mean, that's got to be better than a boot camp, right? You learn a trade. You learn a trade, you go out on an adventure, you see the oceans around New Zealand. I mean, that's got to be far better than, I don't know, lugging rocks or whatever they do at these military camps.
That's what it was supposed to do originally. When we did the Sea Lord's deal, there was supposed to be this, particularly amongst Maori, young Maori, an influx of them going out on fishing boats and stuff. And I completely agree with you. We've sort of lost the... And Tellys does it, actually. Tellys staffs their boats.
So Tellys is a good one, right?
Staffs their boats with New Zealand. And they're crying foul and saying, hang on a minute, we're competing against these guys who are Koreans, who are earning minimal wages. And I would argue that we're not policing them nearly sufficiently enough, and they're getting ripped off like crazy.
How does it make you feel as a New Zealander, as an Aucklander, as a Prince of Auckland, if you will, that we would allow effectively slave labour to occur under our noses and just turn a blind eye to it?
Oh, well, we still claim the moral high ground. We're hypocrites. Yeah. We're utter hypocrites. Yeah. I mean, what you said, David, about the Sea Lord was set up to help Maori, to help Maori. And I mean, all the rest of the Pacific Islanders, they're all fishermen. We're all fishermen. I mean, my father's Dutch, our family used to be fishermen. Let's do some fishing. Why should we let someone else do the fishing? That way we can control the waters, the stocks, everything.
Question to both of you. When will John Key tell other beneficiaries, like pensioners, students with student-free loans, and every middle-class family who receive Working for Families. When will John tell them how they can spend their money the way he's trying to with teenage mothers? When can we get a date on that?
15, 20 years in the future, maybe?
15, 20 years in the
Something like
future? When is that going to happen?
I don't think there's going to be a time when he's going to go too far down that track. But I tell you what, I mean,
because they're the deserving, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean,
well,
you know, and I think it's a good point. I mean, when you look at what we pay out in sort of welfare, I mean, by far the biggest chunk is people over the age of 65.
Yeah, that's right. That's
receiving their
but they're
pensions,
deserving. We have this view of these other people who don't deserve, don't we?
Well, I mean, the argument about deserving and not deserving is sort of a bit of a difficult one. But I can tell you what, I mean, this sort of policy is like a wolf whistle to the people out there saying, yeah, mate, I mean, there are people out there ripping the system off. And when you go around the streets, and I'm out in the streets a lot now at the moment, a woman came up to me the other day and we were talking about exactly this, and she was saying, you know, people are sponging off the state. And I said, well, yeah, it's from the top to the bottom. And I started talking about Dave Henderson, this property developer that paid actually no tax despite all the millions that he earned.
Right.
The thing that really just got up my nose, and she said, yeah. But down my street, there's a guy that's getting a sickness benefit, and he was up on a ladder the other day, and why should we, he's ripping the system off. And so for those sorts of people, it's local.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
the guy
the
down the
issue is where
street.
they don't
and for
see
New
it.
Zealanders, it's the fair button. It's not fair.
That's right.
And John Key is tapped into it.
Yeah.
And I think you have to play it really carefully here around this and say, deserving, yes, but obviously, having people on welfare is not a welfare in the sense of not being able to move off it and do something else is a bit of a problem.
Well, as an actor, of course, I've been on the dole.
Of course, because it's part of what they actually give it with your certificate, diploma, don't they? There's your application.
It's part of the training.
Talking about overseas people coming over and taking your jobs as well.
Exactly.
And it's no fun.
No.
It's no fun. You get just enough money to get by on. You do not get enough money to go up and buy cocktails and have a good time.
No.
Having said that, that's a good thing. Because otherwise, man, I would just be lazing on the beach drinking cocktails.
Question for both of you. We have
Youth
youth unemployment at a staggering level now, while also having some of the highest sexually transmitted infection rates amongst teens, some of the highest teen pregnancy rates, alongside research this week that show we have the highest rate of female teen suicide rates in the developed world. How do these welfare reforms deal with any of those issues?
Well, maybe they're not looking at the causes of this. So has anyone investigated what is causing these things? Clearly, we understand where the chlamydia is coming from, Hamilton. But, I mean, everything else. Where is it coming from?
Yeah. It's an issue of poverty, and Gluckman touched on that with his research, didn't it?
Yeah, he did, and it is about poverty. We have a really, really good education system. I come back to the point that I was making before. I mean, we have a great education system, but and we're in the top 10, despite Anne Tolley's reforms and what she's going to do, which is ironic, because basically what we're doing is what the UK and the US is doing with national standards, and they are at 15 and 24 in the developed world, and we're about third or fourth.
Yeah, so we're looking to adopt their failed standards.
Let's see if we can get down there.
Are they busy trying to adopt our standards? Well, we're trying to adopt theirs.
We're trying to adopt theirs. Yeah, but the issue is that we get this enormously long tail of kids that are not coming through and not performing. And we're talking about national standards to tell us something that we already know, and we're not really fixing, as you say, the problem about where, in fact, we should be going with this.
Who wins, who loses with these welfare change reforms?
Well, I guess if you're getting bashed, you lose, don't you? You lose, and the kids.
Yeah.
But I think it's New Zealand loses, because ultimately this doesn't stay locked up in a little suburb in South Auckland or whatever. It spreads. And it affects us all, and it's something that we should all be worried about.
Thank you, panel. Moving on to related issue 2. The real machinations, of course, behind the scenes of this welfare change is that we are privatising social welfare, and these changes will be rolled out to every beneficiary. But seeing as we are already starting this with prisons, do we really care about those on the bottom of the heap getting the same standard of public services we all expect? David, what is wrong with a government subcontracting its social obligations out to corporations?
For the simple reason that what you would want from an agency that's dealing with these sorts of issues is something that is an agency that is not going to be solely motivated by by making money out of it, effectively. So, for example, we're talking about private organisations. Although there are social organisations out there with plenty of capacity who are already doing a good job, and we could actually help them a lot more. And looking at saying, well, give it to a private organisation. Well, private organisation, for example, puts somebody into work. Great, gets a tick for that. What sort of job is it? Puts somebody onto an education scheme. Great. It could be a 3-month scheme. Gets a tick for that. Collects. Yeah. It's about outputs and not about outcomes. And what we really want to do is see outcomes, good outcomes coming out, rather than the sort of the profit model, which always runs on outputs and tick the box, collect the money. It's not to say that there's not some good people out there, but I just, again, it's the simplicity of saying that somehow this is going to fix the problem, and it's simply not going to do that.
Jeff, Bill English called our Get Tough on Crime prison system a moral and fiscal failure in the budget, and Peter Boydenhout from the Private Prison Corporation, GEO, told the Select Committee that private prisons wouldn't save money. Are we implementing corporate culture in areas of civil society that aren't supposed to actually have a corporate culture implemented?
I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes. I mean, with the whole privatising of any of the government functions, do it if you're going to save some money, and that money gets returned to the government for useful things, with some sort of economy of scale or better organisation from the private sector. But of course the private sector, as you say, is going to want to take a chunk of profit. Now that chunk of profit could have been spent on the people that it was collected for. So it seems to be a balance of if you're the profit taking that whoever the private company is less than the efficiencies they're making, we're actually better off. But who checks that?
Right.
Does anyone check that? Is there a prospectus? Because otherwise, as you say, it's just tick the box, look at our numbers, aren't they great?
Yeah. Yeah. David, one of these private social welfare companies get a bonus if they remove an unemployed person from their list. This can be done by finding an unemployed person a job, or it can be done if the unemployed person refuses to take a job, which results in them having their benefit cut. Aren't these incentives designed for the benefit of the private company rather than the beneficiary? And shouldn't any bonus be going to the employers who are being brave enough to hire someone in this economic environment?
Well, yeah, I think that last point is a really, really good point. I mean, on the one hand, what we're desperately needing to do is to put more of our young people into apprenticeships or into some sort of real work that'll lead on to something else.
Jobs, jobs.
Yes, and what this will favour is temporary jobs.
Yeah.
Now, if you can provide and let's face it, employers are strapped at the moment.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of, I was talking to some builders the other day. They would like to take on some more apprentices. They can't. There's a whole bunch of apprentices out there who if they were or potential apprentices, if they were given the opportunity to transfer that dole money and take it onto and pass it on to an employer or something like that. There's creative ways around it.
That's right.
What we've seen in the last year is $145 million being taken out of skills training by Stephen Joyce. Now that money is desperately needed for what we're talking about here.
So why pay the bonus to a corporation when that money should be going to a bloody employer? If they're going to be brave enough to take someone on in this environment, they should get the bonus. Why a private company?
Well, I think it comes back to what we were just talking about before. I think it comes back to no evidence-based sort of policy that's run by ideology, policy that sort of sounds kind of good when you say it, like in a soundbite. But when you really get down to what works and what will really work, it's a little more complicated than that. And I think it's just simplistic.
Jeff, should a 1-year-old be raised by its mother, or should it be raised by the state? As the compulsion to force mothers back to work after their child turns 1 is contrary to all the research Dr. Gluckman has presented on the importance of early childhood.
It's a you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with Freakonomics, the Stephen and Stephen thing. Yeah. And what's the recipe for creating a criminal? Do you guys remember that? Raise a child in poverty with one parent.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the recipe to make a criminal. Yeah. Now, so if you're giving us the choice of, do you go with the mother or the state? Is the mother the only parent in this example here, or would the state provide 2 parents? Do you know what I mean? Because it is about. It's looking after the kids. You look after the kids for a generation, you're sweet. It won't happen again. They won't batch their kids, and it's all fine, and you've got that anti-vicious circle thing. But Punishing 1-year-olds?
Yeah,
Really? That
that's-
doesn't sound like a good idea.
The poverty ID card being forced upon beneficiaries will have their personal details and image on them. Why should the poor be forced to give that information to private companies who and who ultimately will be responsible for holding the security on that data?
Well, hopefully the government, not a private company, will be
Right.
holding all that information, and hopefully a part of the government that actually works properly.
Right.
I mean,
There's a lot of hope there.
Yeah, there is a lot of hope. No,
Okay.
but you can see that you need to have ID cards with photos on it for certain privileges, right? If you want to travel overseas,
Yep.
you need that. If you want to drive a car, you need that.
But apparently you need this to not be able to buy booze and ciggies if you're 16 and 17.
No, so I would support that if every beneficiary must, and that's pensions, that's war pensions, that's everyone. Same rule for everyone. I mean, it's got to be fair, right?
But you know they won't expand it to those people.
I'm not positively wrong.
David, why do they need to have? It's almost like a criminalisation of the poor, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got to say that to me it smacks of Big Brother and a whole bunch of other things. And then look, data's never secure as well. I mean, you need to look at the UK and see somebody lost the entire sort of welfare state in the UK on a stick.
That's
I mean,
right, that's right,
a couple
that's
of years
right,
ago.
that's
So
right.
I mean, so I look again. It plays to that section of the community which says, yeah, it sounds like a good idea to me. The reality is a whole lot more complicated and a bit more different.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. Snow that isn't snow, earthquakes that don't shake, grotty sheet runs down Queen Street. Now Auckland lost against Tasman. I don't know anything about rugby. Couldn't name the captain of the Auckland team. Couldn't name any of the players. Hell, I couldn't even tell you where the game was played. But I do know we are better than bloody Tasman. Has the little big city lost its mojo? David, I blame the lack of an electrified rail loop. Has Auckland lost its mojo? What is going on here? What is going on?
I've got to say that's a bit of a long bow, but I mean, look, I went and saw Auckland play Otago the other day, and the ground wasn't very full. Eden Park wasn't terribly full, and we lost. We should have won. I have to say, I try to despair with Auckland and the Blues, and I know you're not a big rugby fan, but it's different in Southland, I mean, it's different in Invercargill, where they've just picked up the Ranfurly Shield, and they have a ticker tape parade down the middle of the street.
They're proud.
It's great,
Yeah.
and it's great for them, but for Auckland, we just seem to have kind of sort of, I don't know, blobbed out a bit. We've got a great kicker in the Auckland team, Anscombe, Gareth Anscombe, but our Blues team is the same. We charge off, we're fantastic, and then we just sort of peter out and think, well, that's enough, we've done enough now. I don't know. The talkback goes nuts on this.
How does Auckland get its groove back? How does Auckland get its groove
Well,
back?
I think I have to agree with you. I think I think an intercity rail link would make a hell of a difference.
Okay, I'm glad
but I'm
to
not
see
sure
that.
it'll help
I'm glad
our
to see
but
that.
I'm not sure it'll help our rugby team. But nevertheless,
Jeff, you have a brilliant idea for a new tram line. Can Aucklanders with ideas actually get them implemented in the old boys network of Auckland? How have you found it?
Well, it's interesting. Last year, under Banksy, Banksy would call me.
Right.
And Banksy would text me.
Yes.
And I could email him and he would call me back. Now, Len Brown, who I voted for, doesn't.
Have you not had an introduction? I need to get you an introduction to Len.
Please,
I'm
give
going to
me an
make that
introduction.
happen.
I'm glad you brought up the tram thing because I have a little petition going around.
Please explain it to us. Please explain it to the family.
So the petition is basically to bring the trams back to Ponsonby. We've got trams in the Wynyard Quarter that just opened on the weekend. We've got trams down the road at Western Springs. Nothing in between. And so trams connecting those and perhaps a little link down Queen Street would be good. Now, the actual petition wording includes the CBD rail link.
Excellent.
Because between the two of those, we're figuring, that's how you sort out the congestion.
That's a good idea.
Two things. One on the street, which is a relatively cheap one. This will be well under 50 million or whatever. And then you've got the expensive tunnel, but that will solve so many other problems. Between the two of them,
see, that would be awesome for Auckland. I love that you've put some idea and some passion and some vision into our city.
Well,
because no one else is. Both of you. The Super City was supposed to be a unified voice for Aucklanders who have handed over $7 billion to Wellington in direct transport taxes in 15 years, yet has received less than half back from bloody Wellington and actual transport infrastructure. Wellington isn't listening to the super city they created? Is it because their candidate John Banks didn't win? What's going on? No, seriously.
No. Look, Wellington doesn't get Auckland. You go down and you talk to the bureaucrats, the people who hand out the money down there.
Yeah.
It's dominated by Wellingtonians. The officials are from there, from Wellington as well. They don't understand Auckland. They don't understand Auckland thinks, and they certainly don't understand Auckland transport. And I completely agree with you, Jeff. I mean, this is sort of a Mike Lee sort of subtle plan to get the trams back on the agenda down to Wynyard Wharf, and then slowly expand the network. And I think it's a terrific idea. 1955, we pulled them out and
shamefully.
What a shame! Melbourne kept them.
Yes.
And because there was the Melbourne at that point was being run by a general who was a hero from the Second World War, who said absolutely not. And what an inspired piece of thinking that was. I mean, now they've got these, and trams are the thing that people get onto and off more than any other mode of transport throughout the world. They are fantastic things. So Jeff, I think your idea is terrific.
Oh, look, honestly, back in the day, and big ups to Mike Lee. Back in the day, 80% of Auckland public transport, trams. 80%.
Yeah.
Until
Gorgeous.
one of the Dunlops got on the council.
Quick question to both of you finally. As Auckland is host of the Rugby World Cup, will either of you be abstaining from sex for the All Blacks? I would have thought the only thing the All Black supporters would be abstaining from is Adidas. But will you? No abstaining?
Oh, I'm
No
sorry, I
abstaining,
cannot
David,
do
will you
that.
Is this the
abstaining?
thing about the black ring?
Yes,
Huh?
yes, no, yeah.
And we are supposed to wear it. You wear it until it drops off or something.
no.
Sounds like docking, doesn't it?
Thank you, gentlemen. Jeff, your final word this week is?
My final word is I would very much like the viewers to go to onlinepetition.com and look up Trams for Auckland and sign it online, or if they're around the Ponsonby Greyland neighbourhood and see one of the forms around, to sign that. And I think a little warning to some of the politicians in Wellington who, let's face it, a lot of them are in Auckland electorates, yet they seem to want to ignore what Auckland wants. Now, I mean, are we going to punish them in November? I certainly hope the naughty ones get punished, but I mean, it's only a matter of time before someone could start an Auckland party.
Yes.
Ooh.
Good thinking, sir.
Whoa.
Mr. Sheriff?
That's radical. I was doing the numbers a couple of days ago on the adult and community education. 212 schools were involved 2 years ago. Now it's 23. 150,000 people now don't go to night school where they did before. It's just a tragedy. I mean, it's a tragedy because it's part of our culture. It's a tragedy because it's one of the. I went along to a local about a year ago. I went along to a school and to a cooking class. Who was there? A bunch of different people, Asian, couple of Pacifica, and European, a real mix. I said to them, why are you doing cooking class? They said, no, this is the only time we get to get out of the class. We meet these other people here. They're really nice. We've never met before, but we're friends now.
Yep.
And two of them said, this is the first time I've been back into school since I left school. And another couple of them said, and I said, what are you going to do after this? I said, we're going to do a course in accountancy. We want to carry this on. This is we just forget the real. The pearls that our night school system that we had in New Zealand created, and we're losing it, and I think it's just a shame.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, 2 things of note this week. The first was watching that slimy Simon Bridges on TVNZ Breakfast saying, I don't want to debate the stats when discussing our horrific youth unemployment rates. That's because you can't, you clown. John Key's Benny bashing welfare is the social equality, what Adidas is the brand management. Sleepy hobbits reap what they sow. It is sad this attack on the weakest members of society occurs in the very same week we lay to rest one of our greatest champions for the poor, Sir Paul Reeves. The second note this week, thank the little baby Jesus that the SPCA gave Rugby World Cup organisers the excuse to stop the 1,000 sheep down Queen Street fiasco from going ahead. Here is a rare opportunity to showcase Auckland. The city is sailed, the largest Polynesian city in the world, the new capital of arts and culture. And how did our Rugby World Cup organisers want to sell us? As a Hicksville sheep joke looking for a romantic date, as Brian Rudman so deliciously described what running 1,000 sheep down Queen Street would be perceived as. A tikawiti on steroids steroids where the Gucci shop got mobbed by a flock of live Ugg boots. Auckland is not dependent on the rural industry for its economic might. Auckland is an industry on its own. Are these Rugby World Cup organisers doubling as consultants for Federated Farmers and Fonterra? Stick to touring fake Rugby World Cups and invoking architectural vandalism for Party Central rather than degrade Auckland to a cattle stop. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.